Hi, this is Delisa, and this is one of my garden Zooms to help you get started with growing your own garden. So I'm going to be here in my sunroom. The date is April the 17th, and I have started a lot of my starts already in the sunroom, but I'm going to show you how you can start some if you would like to. Now, this process is not necessary to have a garden. So if you are a brand new gardener, I actually think you might be better off just to go to any of the stores that sell the small plants called bedding plants or starts and just buy a nice healthy plant that you can put in your garden. So I'll just show you an example of what that looks like. So you've seen these at the garden stores. So these are about 3.5 weeks old. I planted, these are different kinds of varieties of kale. I planted those about 3.5 weeks ago in my sunroom, and they're looking wonderful. So I can't actually plant them for another month, so they're going to be a lot bigger by then. But this is actually a really good size to buy if you are buying them. Now, if you want to plant your own, that's a really fun thing to do. And it saves a lot of money because it's a lot cheaper to buy a seed packet that has hundreds of seeds in it than to buy the little packets. However, I don't want anybody to think that this is a necessary thing to do. You can just buy the starts. And if you're just getting started and you have a lot of things to learn, then you might want to wait and do this next year. But if you're ready to do this and you still have plenty of time, if you live in Alaska, we won't be planting our gardens for another month at least. So here's how we do it. You've got to have a potting mix, and you can see this. This particular brand is Pro Mix, and I have added water to it and stirred it around with my hands, and it's really light and fluffy, and it actually doesn't have any soil in it. And so it's exactly what we need to get started with our plants though. Okay, so we want it to be nice and loose and easy for the roots to develop in there. And then we're going to take them out of those little pots and put them into wherever they're going to be. In many people's situation, it's going to be out in the ground in the garden, which is great. Or it might be in a big pot that you put out on your deck, or a planting box. So there's all different ways to do it. And I've done a previous video that talks about what kinds of soil you would use for different situations. So if you haven't watched that one yet, you might want to do that. But for today, let's just get started. I'm going to show you that when you get pots, they come in different sizes. So this is a 6-pack. These are called cells. There's 6 cells in there. And I like this size. I've experimented with all different ones, but there's more room for the root structure to grow in here than there is in smaller ones. But like here's a little 4-pack, and I'm sure you've seen these at the garden stores. That will work, but it really doesn't allow the roots to expand as much as I like. And this is a little 4-pack also, which it's bigger on the top, but it actually is the same depth. And so I'm going to just show you the difference between these. You can see that this one has a lot more room for the roots, even though the tops look the same. So what we're really wanting to do first is to have good room for our roots to get going. Now, that being said, there are smaller ones than these too, just little round ones like that, and they work. But this is just my preference. I like to be able to give them a good root structure. Then sometimes we pot, if it's not time to plant outside yet and we want to give our plants a chance to grow bigger, then we can transplant them from the smaller pot into the bigger pot before we go out into the garden. So I will be potting some of mine up. I'm going to show you how to do that today, but I'll be doing that definitely because those kale plants I just showed you, they're ready they could go in the garden today if the garden didn't have a whole bunch of snow on it and have frozen ground. So I'm going to want to give them more room, and then they'll just be even bigger and more robust when they go into the garden. So I'm just going to use these little 6-packs. And first thing that you do is after you've got your soil mix, soil-less mix, you just fill them up with your potting mix, which is, and I'm not going to pack it down, but I just kind of shake it a little bit like that. And then we're going to plant in here. So I've got a variety of different things that I could plant today. So let's try some lettuce. Now I like to plant a variety of different salad greens. And so I have 3 different kinds of lettuce. This one's called prize head. And it's basically got kind of, it's like a red leaf lettuce. So you need to read the seed packet first so you know what to do. And it gives you instructions. One of the things it says is cover the seed with 1/8 inch of light soil. So that means just barely cover it with a little bit of soil. And then it tells you, you know, once the plants are established in the garden, you can thin them to 10 to 12 inches apart. So I'm going to, it says germination takes approximately 1 week to 10 days. Start seed in a cool 55 to 60 degree temperature. That's good information because some seeds really like to be warmer, like 70 degrees. And so if you have a room that's warmer, you're going to want to put those seeds in that one. Now I'm going to put these in the garage until they germinate because this sunroom is going to be more than 55 to 60 degrees. So let's take a look at these. Now, one thing that's handy about these is that they're a very light color, so they're easy to see. Some of them are like little dark specks, like a little piece of dust, and they're hard to see. So I'm just going to lay them on here, and I'm going to plant 2 in each because there's a chance that one of them won't germinate. Some people plant more than 2, they put 3 or 4, but then after they germinate means that you start to see the green part coming up. You're going to want to thin them out so that you don't have, you know, 2 or 3 of them growing in here. So I know you're not going to be able to see those on the top, but they're just laying on the top now. So what I'm going to do is take a light sprinkle and just sprinkle it as lightly as I can over the top. And now I'm just going to lightly tap it down a little bit because I want the seed to be in, I want the soil mix to be touching it and not the seed just be surrounded by air because it needs to have some contact there, but I'm not putting a lot of pressure on it. Now this mix is damp, but it's not wet. And one thing that seeds need is they need moisture in order to germinate. So I always have my spray bottle of water here, and I'm just going to give this, I'm not going to wet the whole thing because the whole thing is damp. I'm just spraying the top lightly, as you can see, just to make sure that that seed starts with some moisture in it. And then I will check them again tomorrow and the next day. And if they're drying out on the top, I'll give them another light sprinkle. I won't have to water them deeply for a few days, but I will make sure that the top doesn't dry out. So now one really important thing to do is to mark this. So we need to know what is in here. I usually end up with a few mystery plants that either got mismarked or I forgot to mark them, or sometimes if something didn't come up in one cell, I will plant something else in there. And then later I think, I don't recognize that. And so then it goes into the garden and later I find out what it is, which is kind of fun. So anyway, you can buy these little plastic markers, and then I just mark on them with a little marker. So I'm going to stick that in there. And it's important for me to remember what kind of plant it is, because when it first comes up, you can't usually recognize it. And I also need to remember, oh, this needs to be germinated in a cool environment. So I'm not going to leave this on my shelves here in the sunroom because it's going to get too warm here. So I just set this aside here, and that one doesn't have any special instructions about light or dark. It had instructions about temperature. Now I have some other seeds that I planted last night. And this is a flower seed, Schizanthus. And I chose to plant this in a mushroom. This is what mushrooms come in at Costco, and I save these. But I just kind of sprinkled this flower seed on here, and I'm going to transplant those out after they sprout, and I'll put them in a pot. But it says they need darkness to germinate. So I'm going to cover them with this piece of cardboard and set them aside because I want them to germinate. And so if the seed packet tells me they need darkness, I'm going to believe them. But that's a plant that I grow every year. So another thing that I do while I'm planting, is I keep a notebook about the date and what I planted and how many of them I planted. And so then when I move them out to the greenhouse or move them out to the garden, then I make another note of that. And I can look back at all my previous years to see what I did and when I did it. And then at the end of the summer, if I'm diligent enough, I will make notes, during the summer as well. I'll make notes about how did something do, or like I should have planted it earlier, or I should have planted it later. So let's do one more plant like that. And maybe I'll plant nasturtiums. So nasturtiums are a flower, but you can eat the leaves and the flowers. So even though it's a beautiful flower, you can be picking the leaves and the flowers and putting that in your salad. They're kind of spicy. And then when they go to seed, they have something that kind of looks like a pea on it. The seeds are big like a pea, and they're really spicy. And so if you like spicy things, I mean, it has an interesting flavor, but it's spicy. So this seed packet says sow them outdoors after the last expected frost, cover them with 1/4 to 1/2 inch of fine soil firm down. Seedlings do not transplant well. So what they're telling me is you shouldn't really plant them in here. You should really just wait and plant them outside. But I have planted them inside all along, and I just am very careful when I do transplant them to not disturb the roots more than necessary. But these have a great big fat seed. I don't know if you can see that. They're about the size of a pea. So a lot of seeds are tiny, but this is a pretty fat seed. So I'm just going to poke my finger down in there and drop it in. And I'm not dropping it very far, just, maybe 1/2 inch. And now you could put 2 in there, but I only did put 1 in there because I'm going to be planting several. I'm going to plant 3 of these containers full, not right now, but I'm just going to kind of move that soil around to cover that seed that's in there instead of just sprinkling it on the top like I did with that other one, which just needed a tiny bit. Okay, nasturtiums. Now there's all different colors and types of nasturtiums. Some of them are more trailing, some of them are more bushy, and there's different colors. And So you can experiment with different types. But I'm going to give them a little squirt. Whoops, wrong one. Now this I'm not going to put out in the garage because it doesn't say anything about wanting a cold, cooler temperature. I am going to do one more of this, and that is alyssum. Because alyssum has a little bit different suggestions. It says, do not cover with any soil or other medium. So it says to sow it outdoors as soon as the danger of frost has passed, broadcast the seed. And what that means is, you know, just kind of toss it out there. That's not what I'm going to do because I want to get this blooming as quickly as possible. So it says for transplanting, the young seedling plant should be spaced about 6 to 8 inches apart. So if you haven't grown alyssum, it's really a fun plant to grow. And there's different colors. This one has a pink and white blossom on it. Some of them are just white. And I think there's even some blue ones, I'm not sure. But they're very small seeds. And they grow fast and they bloom early. And that's something that's nice to know is, you know, how early are they going to bloom? Are they an early bloomer or a late bloomer? And some other ones that I'm going to plant here are called zinnias, and they are late bloomers. So everything else in the garden has been blooming for a long time before the zinnias start to bloom. And they need more heat. But for people who live outside of Alaska, they probably would bloom earlier and you could start them outside earlier, but they don't like any frost at all. So put them in the warmest part of your garden and don't expect them to bloom until, you know, late August maybe. But back to the alyssum. It's an early bloomer, which is handy, and it looks great. It just grows very small. It grows right around the edges of things and kind of fills in gaps in pots, so it's really nice. But it's tiny, tiny, tiny seeds. I don't know if you'll be able to see this. Come up here and see if you can. Yeah. Okay, so I've got a bunch of seeds, and I don't want to have a whole bunch growing in there because I do have to thin them out. So I try to be careful and only put, you know, maybe 3 or 4 on there, but it's hard to tell what I'm doing because they're very tiny. And so I am going to come around later and thin them out. Okay, and I got way more than 3 or 4 on there, but you don't want to just like put a glob on there because then that makes a big job for you later. Okay, so I'm going to put these back in here. And I am going to save these seed packets because they, even if they're several years old, most of the time they'll still germinate. So now remember, I'm not going to cover these with any soil at all. So I'm just going to press down lightly with the back of my fingers because they'll fit in there. And again, this is just so you have contact with the soil. Now, since I'm not covering them at all, where's my spray bottle? I definitely need to be sure that these continue to stay damp. So I'm going to check on them. I'll check on them tonight before I go to bed. And if they're looking dried out, I'll just spritz them again. I don't want them soaking wet, but I do want to keep them damp. So I'm going to stick my alyssum in here so I know what's wet. I'm going to show you a plant that so this is Swiss chard. I planted this about a week ago. And you see there's quite a few starts in each one. So what I do is I just pull out, well, I usually use 2 fingers, 2 hands, but look at the long root system on that. So what you don't want to do is to disturb the soil too much. So if I wait until they get bigger, like quite a bit bigger before I thin them, then I'll actually just cut off the ones that instead of pulling them out, I just cut them off because I don't want to disturb all the roots in there. But the goal is to end up with, one really healthy plant in each cell. But you can wait until later and then just cut them off after you decide which one is the strongest one. So now I'm just going to show you one more thing, and that is about transplanting something that's in one of these small pots into a bigger pot. Now this is a type of marigold, and I planted it about a month ago, and I'm a little puzzled by this because this is supposed to get to be pretty big. It's a variety I haven't grown before, and it already has a bud on it. And that makes me think it's under some distress, because plants will go to seed when they're under stress. I mean, they'll also bloom, when it's their time to bloom. But it's not time for these guys to bloom yet. So I'm looking at them and I'm saying, I think you guys are unhappy here. And I'm not sure why you're unhappy, but if you have crowded roots, I'm going to at least take care of that for you. So I'm going to transplant these into a bigger pot and just see if they start to grow bigger faster. And it'll be interesting to see what happens with this blossom. Okay, so obviously this is a lot bigger, and so I'm going to need some extra soil, but I'm only going to put a little soil in the bottom to start with. Probably can't see that, can you? But it's just up about to there, because now what I'm going to do is take one of these out and leave all the soil that's around it and put it in here, and then just fill in the soil around the outside. So I use my fingers on the bottom to just push up on that just a little bit, and then I'm going to pull it out with my fingers. Now you see that's got a good root system here. You see that it's the root part is the first part to grow, and that's really the most important thing when we're starting these, is we want them to grow a good root system. So I'm going to just loosen this a little bit around the edges, because I want it to start spreading out when it gets in the ground in the bigger soil. And if you don't do that, and if it starts curling around and it kind of makes its own constriction, and it just goes around in a circle. Now it's not really root bound, but I just like to loosen that a little bit, and then I guess you can kind of see what I did. So now I'm just going to put that down in there, and you don't want it to be too high, so that's about right. So now I'm just going to fill that in. And even though it doesn't look like it's taking a lot more soil, it's going to have so much more room in here. And every time I transplant something into a bigger pot, I see very quickly it starts to get, the plant just grows bigger because it's constrained by the size of the pot. So I'm poking that down in a little bit because I don't want to have an air gap, because the roots won't grow out into the air. If they run into air, they'll just quit. But they do want aerated soil around them, or I call it soil. It's not true soil, it's potting mix. But you don't want to cram it in tightly. You just want to tap it down a little bit. So now this is, I'm going to do the rest of them, but I'll do that later. I don't have to do each one of them for you because they're the same. So I'm going to stick a marker in there so I don't forget what it is. And then I will put these all together, and I'm not going to put a marker in every single one because I'll know that they're all the same thing. But now this is going to definitely change the dynamics for these plants. And like I say, I don't really know why they are getting buds on them, but my guess is that they're stressed. And the only stress that I'm aware of is perhaps that it wanted to be in a bigger pot. Okay, so I'm going to be sure that I write all these things down in my notebook. I need to always know what is happening. And it's great fun to look back from year to year and to see when I did things and how it worked out, because that's one of the ways that you learn gardening is just your experience of experimenting. So I do keep my seed packets from year to year, and I've got a whole basket full of these. One side of these is flowers and the other is vegetables. And so I just fold over the open part and put a paper clip on it. And as long as they will germinate, then they're good, they're viable. So if they don't germinate, then you haven't lost anything, they just didn't germinate. But instead of buying a new seed packet every single year, like this one says 2017 romaine lettuce, and I'll find out real soon if it's going to germinate. And if it doesn't, then I'll have to buy some new ones. But I usually plan on lasting about at least 5 years. Okay, so for those of you who are on the live call, I'm going to open it up to Q&A now. And for those of you who've just been watching the video, I hope this helped you a little bit knowing how to plant your seedlings yourself. You're going to take care of them now once they're planted. And that means putting them in some light. And if you have some access to overhead fluorescence, that's great. If you don't, you can put them in a window, but they really do better if they have some extra light. And then, so you're going to keep them watered and keep the light on them and give them lots of love because they love that too, and admiration. And then when they get big enough, you're going to transplant those out into the garden. So I'm going to show you that stage when I can actually get out in the garden. All right, thanks for joining me, and hope you learned something that'll help you today.